there is certainly an implicit bias where people are walking around with the same information, same credentials, but based on their ethnicity, based on their race, they are getting these very different results. Micro insult, where someone may think they are giving you a compliment, but because of the embedded stereotype, they're actually insulting you or your demographic of people. We all need training. We all need consistent training, and we need to create this environment where we can be resilient in the face of these issues at this rapidly changing time. Rapidly changing.
My name is Nina, and I'll be the moderator for this webinar. I wanted to start out by giving a bit of background on our speaker, Amal Yassin. Amal Yassin Esquire is the founder of Miles Tales Publishing and Education Consulting and the author of The Talk, A Black Family's Conversation About Racism and Police Brutality, Student's Gift, and other best-selling books. Her unique understanding of social issues, business, and law has enabled her to become a relevant voice on issues as varied as race relations, women's issues, dating, parenting, self-love, hair bullying, and entrepreneurship. Through her company, Miles Tales, Ms. Yassin, along with her team of thought leaders and artists, facilitate life-changing diversity and inclusion training sessions that incorporate legal analysis, storytelling, drama, dance, history, cutting-edge psychological research, mindfulness, and restorative justice circles. The sessions engage participants and organizations and truly propel them toward their goal of fostering a more equitable, cohesive, and productive work environment. Additionally, these programs may be customized to include diversity issues such as race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, political affiliation, and ability. Ms. Yassin earned a BA from Harvard University, an MBA from the Wharton School, and a JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Now, without further ado, here is Amal Yassin to discuss building your all-star team with inclusive interviewing.
Welcome, everyone. So happy to see you here, and I'm so glad that you've decided to join us for this important programming, which is called The Key to Inclusive Interviewing. So I know many of you are interested in this topic because we would like to ensure that we live in a more equitable world. And very often the interviewing process is the sort of welcome to your company, your law firm, your brand. And if the person who's being interviewed does not feel included, it can have many harmful repercussions. Thank you so much. My name is Ama Carrie Yassin. I am an attorney and a diversity consultant. My company, Miles Tales, provides diversity training and diversity consulting services to universities, corporations, nonprofits, as well as law firms and other organizations. So now you know about me. In terms of my career as a lawyer, I graduated from University of Pennsylvania Law School and Wharton for my MBA. And I had the pleasure of working at Cleary Gottlieb, Steen and Hamilton, and then Citigroup before entering my own journey as an entrepreneur. So what are we going to do today? We're going to have our welcome and introduction, some of which I've already done. We're going to discuss from a holistic perspective how implicit bias impacts recruiting and retention. We are going to discuss the common forms of bias that happen during the interview process. We need to bring these issues into our awareness so that we can work to make sure that they are not rearing their ugly heads, right? Then we're going to discuss, this is the most important part, tools to interrupt common forms of bias during the interview process. We're going to discuss everyday opportunities to promote equity, and then we'll have our conclusion and our recap. So welcome. This is me. Now you know me, right? Short hair in that picture, longer look now, but the same lady. And if you ever want to get in contact with me, the name of my organization is Miles Tales Publishing and Training, and I'm a diversity inclusion trainer, speaker, and consultant. The intention of this program today is to foster a feeling of belonging during this often divisive time, a feeling of community, to foster greater cross-cultural understanding, to give you tools that enable confidence And there's always the idea of rehumanizing each other. So often in this very polarized society, we forget that at the bottom of it all, you're all human beings. Thank you so much. All right. So let's first examine the impact of bias on recruiting and retention at organizations. We're going to discuss a couple of phenomena. We have phantom job openings, which you may be wondering what that is, but don't worry, we'll explain it. Implicit bias in recruiting, fit tests, microaggressions at work, and biased performance reviews. We're going to discuss how all of these really, unfortunately, continue to pervade recruiting and retention at law firms and at other organizations. It is unfortunate, but this is still happening to this day. So let's discuss phantom job openings. These are job openings that are not true. They're not real. They're like a phantom. This is a quote about it. Companies and institutions will interview people to pad out a candidate roster only in order to get approval to hire someone they've already chosen for the role. They don't mind wasting job seekers' time on fake interviews just to satisfy a policy. This was actually in Forbes, okay? So this is a known, studied, written about phenomena, and I'm sure many of you may have experienced it. You may have gone on an interview where you felt like something wasn't right. You felt like, oh my goodness, right? This seemed as if it was just routine, like it wasn't genuine. It could have been a phantom job opening. So if we care about equity and making sure that we are able to get the best candidates by having an open system, we need to get rid of this. No more fake job openings when job seekers are getting excited, putting on their suits, coming to an interview when you already have it firmly in your mind that another candidate is going to get the job. Let's work on earnest job openings, authentic job openings, rather than phantom job openings. And that requires having an open mind. Even when you think someone might be great for the position, that you actually in earnest give people an opportunity. Next up, we have implicit bias in recruiting. So these studies that I'm sharing with you are incredibly sobering. We have the Whitened Resume study by Catherine DeSellis and her colleagues and company. And then we have the job callback study by the late sociologist Deva Pager. Okay, so let's talk about the Whitened Resume study. So employer callbacks for resumes that were whitened fared much better in the application pile than those that included ethnic information, even though the qualifications listed were identical. So what's the backstory? What do I mean by that? These researchers actually created resumes that were identical in terms of job application, job information and education and so forth. All the qualifications are the same. So we have these two resumes that are identical. Then we make one a whitened one and one's an ethnic one. So let's say the genuine resume belonged to someone named Kathy Choi. And it says that the person is a part of the Asian and Pacific Islander Association. And it says that the person, I'm not sure, has other ethnic details about, a favorite food that may be a food that is associated with Asia. So we have this resume. On the other hand, we are now going to whiten it. Instead of it saying, Catherine or Kathleen Choi, it's going to say Catherine or Kathleen Smith. Instead of saying the person's a member of the Asian Students Association or Asian American Students Association, it's going to say that the person plays, let's just make up a sport, the person plays field hockey, right? We are going to just change the details of the resume so that it is very, very hard to detect that the person is a member of a racial minority in this country. So now they put the resumes out there. And they did this, for multiple demographics. They did it for Black candidates. Let's say the person's name is Jamal Jackson, and the person's a part of the Black Law Students Association, and the person enjoys playing, basketball. They change it to this person's name is actually John Johnson or John Jackson, or they change a certain name, or maybe not John Jackson, John Witherspoon. Like, they just make up another name which they think sounds more white to people, and they put other sports. They say the person is a member of, plays polo, is a member of a country club. I'm not sure, right? I'm just making it up, for example. So they whiten the resumes. These were the results. 25% of Black candidates received callback from their whitened resumes, while only 10% got calls when they left ethnic details intact. Whoa, that is a big difference. 25% versus 10%. Similar results for people of Asian ancestry. 21% got calls if they used the whitened resume, whereas only 11.5% heard back if they sent resumes with racial references. Very sobering, meaning individuals who thought that they were potentially well-intentioned, they thought that they were looking at resumes fairly, clearly were not. They had an implicit bias towards candidates of color. This is another study, the job callback study by Devar Pager, may she rest in peace, a really phenomenal sociologist out of Princeton. So basically what she did, and she used Princeton students as part of her study, is she sent them out. She told some of them to say that they had a criminal record. She told some of them to say they did not have a criminal record. Interesting fact. She went about this study trying to focus on the impact of former incarceration on job prospects. She came back with results that made her recognize that she really needed to be focused on something else, and that was race. So 34% of white candidates without a criminal record got a call back. 17% of white candidates with a criminal record got a call back. Now let's compare it to the Black candidates. 14% of the Black candidates without a criminal record got a call back, as opposed to 5% of Black candidates with a criminal record. I want you to focus on that for a moment and tell me what seems a bit odd and shocking about this. Just look at it for a moment. Well, this is probably what you discovered. White candidates with a criminal record fared better than Black candidates without a criminal record. The researcher was shocked by this. How on earth is that being Black is more of a handicap than a criminal record? Shocking, but true. So we recognize that there is certainly an implicit bias where people are walking around with the same information, same credentials, but based on their ethnicity, based on their race, they are getting these very different results. Next, we have fit test. Oh, I love talking about this because unfortunately, this is still happening and we need to get it to stop. So I remember at this point, I had not yet entered the legal profession, but I've certainly, heard, when I first heard it, I had not yet entered the legal profession, but it certainly happens in the legal profession. I was literally told by a manager when the manager was sending me off to do interviews, test for fit. And it goes by different names. Sometimes people call it the beer test. Oh, would you want to have a beer with this person? Sometimes they call it an elevator test. Oh, would you be sad or happy to be stuck in well, who's going to be happy being stuck in an elevator? But if you had to choose someone, would you choose this person to be stuck in an elevator, or you're stuck at the airport, your flight, to do a transaction gets delayed and you're stuck? It's stuck. Is this someone that you want to hang out with? Is this someone that you want to be chummy with? I was told to answer that question to see whether the person would get to the next round of interviews with the company. This is a very, very popular, very, very widespread way of weeding candidates. Let's look at this quote. When you're hiring someone, you need to consider how they'll fit into corporate culture. Sometimes you'll have trouble figuring that out. Try imagining you'd like to have a beer with them after work. This is being said out loud. This is the problem with this. It has serious implications with respect to lack of equity, because very often we feel comfortable with people who are more like us racially, ethnically, socioeconomically, just name all of the leads, right? We feel more comfortable. And so we're basically saying we are creating a culture in an organization which is more homogeneous because we're all looking for people who are quote unquote more like us. And this is incredibly problematic in our segregated country. Look at this. This was from the Washington Post. 3/4 of white people do not have a single non-white Facebook friend. That said, white people and people of color are often having very separate conversations and engaging in separate activities. So people of color very often will not fit. People with disabilities very often will not fit. People of a different gender identity, sexual orientation, we can just keep on naming it and naming it and naming it, will not fit if we are to engage in these fit tests. So why don't we actually talk about realness? And I mean, people sometimes say, no, you can't talk about realness. I am someone who generally wants to have conversations about what is attracting you to this role. Where do you see yourself, developing? How do you want to develop as an attorney? These sort of deeper, more probing questions without running a file, of various laws, we can ask people questions that really allow us to get to know them. And the goal is to make sure that we have a diverse organization where we are all stretching and learning from each other, not where everyone is the same. Next up, microaggressions at work. Okay. So now this term is very, very, very often, I would say, bantered about. Oh, that was a microaggression. That was a microaggression. Let's go to the real definition. Brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, very important, either intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative slights and insults to a target person or group, and that target person or group can be part of a race, a gender, sexual organization, ability or disability, etc. There are 3 types. Micro assault. Now, these are horrible. This kind of feels like someone punching you, but the person is not physically punching you. If I go into an office and there's a noose there, it is referring to, it is suggesting a lynching, which would be horrifying to see. A micro assault, a micro insult, where someone may think they are giving you a compliment, but because of the embedded stereotype, they're actually insulting you or your demographic of people. Oh my goodness, you speak English so well. Oh, you're so articulate. Or then, I mean, this is more clearly insult. You're only here because of affirmative action. And then we have micro invalidations, where people are acting as if people like you don't even exist. When I see you, I don't see color. These are microaggressions at work. And unfortunately, these are incredibly commonplace. Unfortunately, at work, people are making these comments. Now, and I isolated one comment out in 10 years is usually not going to cause someone to leave a organization or a law firm if it's just a one-off, one thing that happened during a long period of time. But unfortunately, very often when it's happening over and over and over and over again, it's like, death by 1,000 paper cuts or whatever that phrase is, the person then is really feeling as if he, she, or they at their wit's end cannot take it anymore and does not want to be a part of the firm anymore, does not want to be a part of the organization anymore. Microaggressions at work very often has a huge impact on retention and very hard to know, because very often you have your exit interview and people just want to leave on good terms. So they're not going to say the truth. They're not going to say people are rude to me all the time. I got all these, insults and slights and micro invalidations. And I felt that this was a really hostile environment. People very often do not say that. And so it's hard for HR managers to even recognize the horrible impact it's having on retention. Next up, biased performance reviews. Now this study, which is not incredibly recent. I've been using this for years, but I unfortunately think that it most definitely still happens. This is the biased performance reviews. Now this was a phenomenal study by leadership consulting firm in which they basically created a memo. They put mistakes in the memo on purpose, and it was basically the same memo. They sent the memo to partners, and 50% of the partners were told. There was a third-year African-American associate named Thomas Mayer who attended NYU. The other 50% received it were told it was a Caucasian associate who had attended NYU. It was the same exact memo, the same exact words, the same language, the same mistakes, identical. Even the name was the same. All they said was, this is that person's African-American, this person's Caucasian. What happens? They asked the partners to score the memo. 3.2 out of 5 was the rating given to the hypothetical African-American associate, where Thomas Mayer received a 4.1 out of 5, nearly a full point difference. Can you imagine? And it was the same exact memo. And so if we extrapolate and say, in some cases, associates of color, new attorneys of color are being rated more harshly. They're having evaluations that are harsher. What is that going to do for retention? Clearly, people do not want to get lower marks or lower evaluations for the same quality of work that their colleague is doing. This is incredibly demoralizing. And so we will see various individuals leaving organizations when this lack of equity exists, when this bias persists, which has real implications, right? Even from a financial perspective, when we're thinking about how bonuses are calculated in some industries. Thank you. All right. So let's take a breather and think about this. We have all of these forms of bias that are occurring and impacting recruiting and retention. Before we even got to the interview, for the most part, in some of these cases, the phantom job opening, this is before we even got to the interview to a certain extent, because the person had the bias in his, her, or their mind that this job is already going to someone else. And so the person has entered the interview process with the bias. Before they walked in the door, there was this bias. Then we have, before the person even got the interview, just seeing the resume. And we have this idea that some people are not even getting a call back to the interview. Then we have this fit test, which is impacting the interview process. Then we have a person who fortunately has gotten through the interview process, is actually working. We want to retain the person because there are studies that show it costs $200,000 to $500,000 to replace an associate. What? So to lose good, hardworking, competent, ambitious individuals because of microaggressions is truly sad. And then, of course, to lose them as well because of bias reviews. So now let's focus on the interview. These are some common forms of bias that emerge during interviews. The first that we're going to discuss, affinity bias / similarity bias. Now, we touched on this a bit when we were discussing the fit test, right? Because we said that the affinity bias very often it's just literally a fit test is like a code word. Affinity bias, right? It's like generally people like people who are similar to them. This is the bias. People have a tendency to favor people who have characteristics that are shared. It could be appearance, beliefs, ethnicity, geographic background. Oh my goodness, you're from the same town as me, right? Family background. Oh, we both grew up with a mother and a father in the home. But we both, whatever it is. Gender, hobby, education. There is a bias for us to look more favorably upon people who have shared characteristics, and the list goes on and on. And so the flip side of this is having less favorable opinions about people who appear different. Next up, confirmation bias. The tendency for interviewers to seek and remember information about a candidate that confirms and bolsters pre-existing beliefs, theories, ideas, and or stereotypes. So this can be very detrimental for racial or ethnic minority members who have been negatively stereotyped. And it's very difficult to counteract because what the person is remembering are the things that they gravitated towards because of pre-existing beliefs. So let's say the pre-existing belief is, young women are just looking for a place to have maternity leave. They're not interested in really working at a firm for a long time. They're just coming so that they can get paid maternity leave for their 2 or 3 kids. And so the person then is looking out for information within the person's, behavior, within the person's speech about, something that may come up regarding children. Maybe the person is speaking during the interview about a volunteer position the person had holding babies in the NICU. And then it's staying in their head. Yep, yep, yep. She likes babies. She says she was volunteering in the NICU. Bingo. Right? I'm making up scenarios, but you get the idea. Confirmation bias. People are walking into the interviews with various biases, pre-existing beliefs, notions, negative stereotypes, individuals, and they are seeking the information that confirms it. Next up is the halo effect. So this is the tendency for interviewers to use their observation of one positive trait to generalize that the client or the candidate has other positive characteristics. So someone says they attended, I'm not sure, a certain law school, the person holds in high regard, let's say Georgetown Law. And now it's like everything the person says looks amazing. The person just seems amazing. But what's really coloring the view is that halo effect of that one positive characteristic is kind of carrying the positive perspective. And so this is the opposite of the horns effect, which we'll go into soon. And it often reinforces stereotypes and may lead to overlooking red flags. So there may be actually some negative aspects of the person's, resume, job history, etc. But the halo effect kind of clouds all of that and makes the person seem like an amazing candidate. And as I said, we would discuss the opposite, which is the horns effect, which is the tendency to view a person negatively after learning about one negative characteristic. So the person says, she quit her job after 3 weeks because, I'm not sure, because of some reason the person looks upon negatively. And now they're seeing everything is negative. It's the opposite of the halo effect. And again, it reinforces stereotypes. And the opposite of it minimizing red flag is that it causes people to then overlook the positive, right? Now there are positive things and we don't even know what those positive things are because we're not paying attention, because everything is being colored. Okay. Next up, we have attribution bias, the tendency to make assumptions about a candidate's actions and intentions based on previous interactions or information. So let's think about this. The person hasn't explained why the person is moved from one job to another, but the interviewer attributes it to the person not really being devoted. Or maybe the person was working for a law firm, then went to do something else, become an actor for 2 years, and then came back to work at a law firm or to interview at a law firm. And the person attributes the 2-year acting stint as a person really hating the law and not being devoted to the law. This may be attribution bias rearing its ugly head, right? Because the person is now attributing a certain decision to reasons that the person just basically made up. Job hopping, lack of prior experience in the industry, time away from the industry. The list can go on in terms of ways that an interviewer can just kind of make a causation, can sort of create a causation without actually knowing by attributing a certain decision to something else. All right now, so let's review. We have affinity bias, when you believe that someone is going to be great and wonderful based on shared characteristics, and you feel at home and you're boosting that person's candidacy because of some shared characteristic. You have confirmation bias when you have a pre-existing belief or theory and you're looking for information. This is the way our brains are wired, that basically bolsters that pre-existing belief. You have the halo effect. You have one positive aspect of the person's candidacy, but you let that color your entire view to such an extent that very often you might miss red flag. Then we have the horns effect, which is the opposite. Basically, you know one negative aspect and now it's coloring and you're not even seeing the positive. And finally, you have attribution bias, where you are basically coming up, you have one piece of information, then you look at another fact, and you're basically tying it together and creating this story without actually asking, okay? So now, let's get to the tools. This is going to be key. We want to create an environment where we are, I would say, training, we are arming the various people within our organization who will be interviewing with information and with tools so that they can engage in a more equitable interviewing process. And we can overcome many of these biases that we've discussed. So let's get into some of these tools. Okay. People, some of you are going to say, oh my goodness, Alma, you're being a little woo-hoo-hoo. You're being a little, fluffy. I put mindfulness in a presentation at a firm recently, and I was told to take it out or to call it something else because it's seen as consultant speak. Okay. So I get it. Some people feel as if they need to see things that are concrete, black and white, and they want to kind of stay away from these things that are not as mainstream, so to speak. I'm not sure what the word is. But I would like to implore you, I would like to request that you actually give this a try and incorporate this within your organization. And that is mindfulness. This is one of the few methodologies that has been proven to reduce bias. What is mindfulness? Intentional awareness of the present moment, including thoughts, emotions, surroundings, body sensations, and other people's language without judgment. You are taking a moment to become mindful, to become more of an observer rather than being reactive. And so this is really crucial and has life-saving impact. So in the criminal justice system and in law enforcement, for example, when you have more mindful police officers, you have fewer accidents, and fewer accidents that are based on bias to a certain extent. So they do studies where they tell police officers, if you see a suspect, they're playing like a video simulation. If you see a suspect with a gun or knife, shoot. If you see a suspect that does not have a gun, knife, or any other weapon, don't shoot. One of the most common mistakes, which you could have guessed, I'm sure, from your own knowledge of the news, is that officers, Black, white, Asian descent, Latin American descent, officers of all races had a tendency to shoot suspects in the video simulation of color, even when they did not have a gun or knife. They somehow misread or misviewed the simulator and thought there was a weapon when there was not. That was the most common mistake. And the other most common mistake was not seeing a weapon when the person was white. So all of these biases are coming at play. And how do we slow down that reactivity so they can actually look at the person and say, that's a wallet, that's not a gun. That's a hairbrush, that's not a gun. That's just a person's hand, it's not a gun. It's through mindfulness. So let's see how we can incorporate this at legal organizations. How we can encourage this. People are busy, but take a meditation break before the interview. Take a moment to actually become more aware of the present moment and not in this rush reactive phase. Set an intention of fairness. Renew your commitment to equity. Acknowledge how you're feeling in the given moment so that you're ensuring that, all of these feelings, you're aware of them, and they're not accidentally impacting the interview, so that if you're in a happy mood, you think the interview went great. But if you're in a sad mood because your spouse is getting on your nerves, the interview goes poorly, and you look at that person as if the person did a poor job. Incorporate mindfulness. I know it's not seen as, what is the word? Concrete, but it's the most concrete weapon we have, to tell you the truth, against bias. Next up, connection. So this is a quote. I heard this quote on Super Soul Sunday with Maya Angelou, and I've loved it, and I've had it in my signature, my personal email signature. Don't beat me up. I never took Latin in school. I took Spanish. I didn't take Latin. So if I'm mispronouncing it egregiously, please forgive me. Homo sum humani nihil a me alienum puto. I am human, and I think nothing human is alien to me, meaning that whenever we think about another human being, we recognize, despite differences of external appearance, despite difference in background, differences in experiences, we understand that there is a human commonality. And this connection that we can have as human beings doesn't have to come from the superficial affinity that we root for the same baseball team or we went to the same law school, but we need to recognize and root it in common human experiences and emotions, right? So we can talk about career goals and work values. Develop a perspective of genuine interest in the interviewee. So when you're talking to the person and when you're engaging your mindful moment, you're going in saying, I'm going to get to know this person. I'm going to get to know this person. I'm going to have a genuine interest in this human being. Next up, prepared questions and notes, and then making sure that you're recording. So let's have a standard list of questions from HR. A vetted list of questions. So, I mean, and at many small organizations, this does not exist, right? Smaller organizations especially. You're just going in there, shooting the, so to speak. Have set questions that you're asking everyone so that you can really be able to compare better. This is a vetted list that is used consistently. This is what we want. A list that's used consistently, and your responses are recorded, or the entire interview is recorded if allowed. Of course, we never record without permission, so if allowed, and that there are rubrics for evaluating responses. A rubric saying, you know, a level 1 answer has these characteristics. A level 2 has this. A level 3, level 4, level 5, etc. The idea is you are now training yourself to look at things more objectively. And I know as human beings, it's very hard to be objective. And that's good, right? To a certain extent, we have to use intuition, but we want to refine our intuition and refine our perspective and balance objectivity with true intuition and not bias. Thank you. Next up, self-monitoring of mental questions. Now, this is why mindfulness is going to be key, because you know, you've experienced it before. There's been a question in your mind, something struck you as odd, and you did not follow up on it. And then maybe you forgot about it. But you monitor yourself, try and monitor your assumptions in order to limit attribution bias so that you can ask these questions like, okay, I noticed you've had 3 jobs in the last, 3 months. Okay, that's, I was going too far. Okay, you've had 3 jobs in the last year. Can you tell me more about what caused this or what happened, right? Well, then, or can you just give me some idea of what's happened? Lack of prior experience in the industry. Okay, I'm very curious. What has caused you to switch from A career to B career? You can get very interesting stories out of this, right? You spent time away from the industry. Oh, for 2 years, you weren't working at a firm. You were acting. I'm just let me know more, right? When you say generally a common question is walking people through their resumes, let them, elaborate. So you're not assuming. Maybe the person's grandfather's dying wish was to see the person act in a play. And so the person's 2 years off and was doing, I'm making things up. We never know the reasons unless we ask. We do not know unless we ask. Self-monitoring of mental questions, right? Those things that are going to probably, impact you, that are going to have you attributing a certain decision or a certain fact about the candidate in a negative way. Ask. Next up, opportunity for advocacy. Allow the interviewee to share. Is there anything else you'd like to share with respect to why you'd be a good fit for this role? Let the person explain. Candidates very often have reasonable and helpful explanations for some negative aspects of their resumes or quote unquote negative aspects of their candidacy. Let them give them another opportunity, right? Make sure that you're giving those opportunities regularly. All right, here are some everyday opportunities to promote equity, because this is going to be so key. Everyday opportunities. The opportunities are always all around us if we would only take them. And it's a muscle. I am still working on it. I'm a DEI consultant. I'm still working on speaking up and developing these skills. This is a lifelong journey. It does not end. It's a lifelong. Okay. So you're hearing recruiting deliberations. You're in the room when they're figuring out like the recruiting strategy. Are you advocating for expanded recruitment at law schools that were not formally targeted? Are you? Or do you look at just this list and say, oh, it's a plain same list of 10 schools or 15 schools and we're just going to go there and we're not going to go anywhere else? Are you someone who's in the room saying, listen, there is talent everywhere. Let's expand the list. If we do not have money to fly someone out there, why don't we at least partner with the school for a virtual meeting or virtual open house, right? There are plenty of ways to achieve this when we're creative, but we only become creative when we set the intention. Are you monitoring the percentages of diverse candidates that are being interviewed? Are you warning against fit tests? I'm asking you, if you were in a meeting and they talk about fit and fit is this superficial, do we love baseball, etc. Like, if you want to say fit, the fit has to be in terms of values. It has to be fit in terms of work ethic. It has to be a fit in terms of higher level things that actually have something to do with the work product, right? Not the superficial, we like the same team and we can talk about the good old days at, our alma mater. Something deeper. Policy discussions. Have you advocated for disability inclusion and accessibility? Does the bathroom policy reflect LGBTQIA plus inclusion, right? So LGBTQIA plus, it's getting longer. So I'll explain each. L for lesbian, G for yay, B for bisexual, T for transgender, Q for queer, I for intersex, A for asexual, P for pansexual. Right? Okay, good. Do your maternity leave, paternity leave, and caregiving leave policies ensure equity? Right? Meaning that fathers need to take off too, mothers need to take off, caregiving people need to take care of their elderly relatives. Are you ensuring that these are aspects of your culture? And is your bereavement leave sufficient? So important now. We're post-pandemic, but as you all know, many people are dealing with long-haul COVID and various issues. You've seen the reports, I'm sure, about the COVID pandemic literally shortening the lifespans of Americans, of course, with the people that have already passed, with the COVID long-haul symptoms that many people are experiencing. This is still a tense time. We really need to speak candidly and about bereavement to make sure that we have bereavement policies that are ensuring a more equitable environment. Okay, next up, how you can be an upstander. Strategic planning meeting. Okay. So I want you to think when you are planning your law organization's future, is DEI a part of that? Do you have goals, right? Are metrics being monitored in terms of your expansion? And I want to say metrics in a very broad way, especially as we are in a time of, let's say, instability, as we are in a time of change surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion because of major Supreme Court decisions that have come down. But we want to make sure that as we think about DI and inclusion, we're speaking very broadly. So a metric that could be monitored is that every year you're expanding to more and more law schools, right? That could be a part of your general strategy. We want to make sure that when you think about DEI, you're thinking about it very broadly, not just in terms of numbers. Do we have 50% female lawyers, 50% male lawyers, or what have you? Not just in terms of numbers, not just in terms of race and gender, which are traditional categories, but also in terms of disability, also in terms of, geography, etc. Very broad. Evaluation and exits. Are evaluation rubrics being used? So we discussed that before, that if we're going to have interviews, we want to make sure that we have rubrics for evaluating those interviews. We have questions and we're asking people the same questions, and we really are being very clear-headed and objective when it comes to the evaluations. Is there a clearly articulated process for challenging evaluations? So you remember my slide from before about the Thomas Mayer memo. So you are, in real life, someone who's like the African-American Thomas Mayer, and you do a memo that's just as good as Caucasian Thomas Mayer's memo, and you realize that you have a 3.2, and if somehow this comes to your attention, this other person has a 4.1. What is the strategy within your organization? Does everyone know that they can challenge it? That they can say, no, this is unfair. This is what this is what I have to show you to show that it's unfair. Is that known? Is that being spread? Is that knowledge? Is that process being spread? Or do people feel as if they get the 3.2 and there's nothing they can do except leave? We're talking about recruiting and retention as a part, and interviewing for inclusion as a part of a general recruiting and retention strategy. What is the way in which they can challenge these evaluations? The diversity committee review terminations before they are final, and to ensure that bias is not at work with the bias is not at work with the termination. And next up, do employees who are leaving engage in exit interviews, and are questions surrounding whether they felt included and a sense of belonging being asked? So we can gain a lot of information from exit interviews, so much, right? Which will help us to have a clearer understanding of where we need to go with respect to inclusion and equity within our organizations. If we are not being serious enough to ask what's going on and why people are leaving, and again, I cannot guarantee that you are going to get honest answers, because very often people say, hey, don't burn your bridges, just act as if everything was amazing and you just had a change of heart. But very often, or in some cases, you will have honest answers, but you need to seek them. And that in itself, right, by leaving a process, by an exit going smoothly, and an exit interview to make sure that the person had the best experience they could have had within your organization, that helps tremendously, because the person will speak highly of your organization, and word will spread. And that will increase the number of people who are interested in your organization. That will certainly increase your reputation, right? Okay, great. Now, when it comes to on the client side, reviewing cases. Some of you work at law firms where there are pro bono opportunities. Some of you may work at nonprofit organizations that are always doing pro bono work. Whatever it is, there's always the ability to ask, are we targeting the underserved in some capacity? Are our legal services being promoted in less obvious communities? Are potential clients aware that our organization is culturally responsive and that we are devoted to equity? These are questions to ask. These are all ways in which you can be disruptors and upstanders within your community. And then we have the everyday indignities or microaggressions. One question is, has a policy surrounding how microaggressions are reported been clearly articulated? Meaning, if I were to go into your organization and speak to a random person and I ask, if you were to experience a microaggression, a micro insult, micro invalidation, micro assault within your organization, what would you do? Would they know? Some organizations have diversity ombuds. These are people who are separate from the organization, who have like a hotline, so to speak, where someone can call and express what happened. And that ombud serves as a liaison, letting the organization know what happened in serving in a mediation sort of capacity. If your organization has an ombud, do people know about it? What do they do when these things happen? Very important. Has everyone within your organization received training on microaggressions? Are they even aware? Are they probably saying insensitive things all the time? And I want to say this. We all will say insensitive things all the time. The landscape in terms of microaggressions and in terms of language is changing drastically. Drastically. I mean, you all have seen it yourselves. When I first started in DEI in 2015, pronouns were not as huge as they are now. The singular they was not as it is now. I don't think I knew the singular they in 2015, right? Things are changing drastically. The language that we use, I give people some of these examples all the time. Before, it was perfectly appropriate, and many of us would not have thought twice about saying the phrase committed suicide. Fairly recently, right? I was a little behind, confession. Maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, I was informed and learned that the phraseology should be death by suicide and not committed suicide, because committed suicide sounds like a sin, like commit a sin. It makes it seem as if it's an active act, rather than the fact that depression and various mental health challenges are real issues, health issues that take away people's lives in the same way that coronary heart disease takes away people's lives. So there's a different understanding now, which has caused the language to change. 10 years ago, this wasn't it. This was not, known. This wasn't in the forefront. That said, we all need training. We all need consistent training, and we need to create this environment where we can be resilient in the face of these issues at this rapidly changing time, rapidly changing. Right? So have the people within your organization receive training on microaggressions. And I'd be happy to join you and do that training. Has the training been reinforced with repetition? I have clients that we do it 1 year, we do it the next year, we keep on going. We repeat it, we do it so that we can continue to learn and grow. And then I was mentioning this before in terms of our ombuds program, where you have someone who's specifically dedicated to serving as a mediator. Really important. All right, I'm going to go through before we come to our conclusions. So some of the opportunities for being an upstander. You are going to be in a recruiting deliberation not too long from now. And I want you to expand the opportunity any way you can. Are you advocating? And I want you to advocate for an expanded list of law schools or of geographies, places, so that more people can have an opportunity, because you need that wider base in order to get anywhere. Are you monitoring, right, that recruitment? Are you monitoring those efforts in order to make sure that you're successful? Are you warning against fit tests, right? Are you advocating for disability inclusion and accessibility? What does that mean? It means that you are ensuring that your organization would be able has a sign language interpreters, that they are on call, so to speak, so that if it ever arises, you are prepared, that you have policies in place to make sure that people are getting the accommodations that they need, that you have a bathroom that's accessible, that your whole entire office is accessible. You're working towards those things. These are work in progress. Rome was not built in a day, but you need to set the intention for it to even begin. I have a colleague that often does these programs with me within my company who discussed, this is terrible. She's in a wheelchair due to an injury that occurred shortly after she was born. So she was born, spinal cord was spot, but due to malpractice, she lost use of her legs very early. He discussed going for an interview after, a law school interview, and she said there was no elevator. And she literally could not even get upstairs to engage in the interview. Horrible. So we all have to think about these things. How exactly does inclusion and accessibility look within our organization? How are we doing? Does a bathroom policy reflect LGBTQIA plus inclusion? Do you have gender neutral bathrooms available for someone to use? It depends on how far you take it. I've heard of men's rooms with tampons and sanitary napkins available because there are trans men who still menstruate. Organizations have that sometimes. Some organizations have that. These are things that we need to just consistently think about as we keep on trying to move towards that never-ending goal, a more inclusive society, and certainly more inclusive legal organizations, more inclusive organizations devoted to justice. Again, you're evaluating maternity leave and paternity leave and various leave policies. You're looking at your bereavement leave. You need to create this. So I know this was about interviewing for inclusion. We certainly did go through interviews, but we want to make sure that after you interview for inclusion and people are there, that you're able to retain them. Right? This is a process. You're thinking about your diversity goals with your strategic planning, your metrics that are being monitored, your evaluation rubrics, your articulated process for challenging evaluation. Some of you who are doing this program who are in HR, I would love for you to just do a test. Just go to someone random and say, do you know what to do if you experience a microaggression? And you can explain to them what a microaggression is. Do you know what the process would be? And just see. Because it's one thing to articulate it, it's another thing for it to be disseminated far and wide so that people are actually availing themselves of it. Diversity committee review of terminations before they're final, making sure that you are asking these questions during the exit interviews about whether people felt included. And you can phrase it this way. Is there anything else that this organization could have done in order to foster your sense of belonging? So it's not a criticism, but it's a solicitation of feedback to provide an opportunity. We have our reviewing cases, whether underserved communities are being served, whether you're pro bono legal services, have broad outreach, whether clients are aware that your organization is, let's say, LGBTQIA plus friendly, or that it's culturally responsive, if you have people within your organization who can translate and so forth. There's so many ways, right? And then, of course, we've already discussed all of these in terms of your microaggressions policy and your training. All right, so let's come to our conclusion. We're coming to an end of the program. Thank you so much for sharing this with me. I'm so happy. So the goal is to have organizations that reflect the racial, ethnic, cultural, religious, political, economic, and thought diversity of our country. Remember, we want that thought diversity. We want that thought diversity that comes from a range of experiences. Why do we want that? Because teams that are culturally diverse generally perform better and are more profitable. So we want this. We want this. We want this, and we want legal professionals who are part of the decision-making process and have access to leadership opportunities. It's not enough to just get through the interview process and you're there. You have to have access to leadership opportunities. You have to be able to grow within an organization because of an organization that respects you. Unfortunately, these goals are very often being thwarted by implicit bias, more often than explicit bias. And this implicit bias deeply impacts both recruiting and retention. And we've discussed it. The phantom job openings, in which it's not a real authentic job opening, it's just being listed there for camouflage, right? Implicit bias in recruiting through these fit tests where you're saying, oh, do you want to have a beer with someone? No, 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 no. Let's talk about real values here. Biased performance reviews, where you saw the Thomas Mayer memo, where just because you know the person's race, you make assumptions about the person or the person's gender or sexual orientation, whatever it is, and it impacts the review process. And then we have these horrible microaggressions at work, which you may think, no big deal, toughen up. But again, it's like death by 1,000 paper cuts. It keeps on happening, and people are going to flee your organization because they want to be in a place where they are respected. Went through all the biases, or not all of them, some of the biases that occur during the interview process. The affinity bias, when you're saying, because this person went to my law school, because this person is from my neighborhood, they must be great. Hooray. We got to be more open-minded. Confirmation bias, where your previously held beliefs are causing you to look for things within that person's interview, resume, etc., that confirms what you already thought. The halo effect, when you think someone is amazing, the one positive aspect, and then you're overgeneralizing it and potentially missing out on red flags. It's opposite, the horn effect, when you see one negative thing and then you're not seeing the positive because it's impacting everything. The attribution effect, when you're taking one fact and you're attributing it to other things and you're not asking questions. So what do we do to get ourselves out of this? Mindfulness, connection, preset questions and rubrics, self-monitoring, and opportunities for advocacy. Thank you so very much. This is my information, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you again.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amal, for that wonderful presentation and joining us today for the Q&A session. We can now go ahead and take some audience questions. Thank you again for joining. We have a couple already, so I'll just go ahead and jump right in. But if you do have additional questions for Amal that you'd like to ask, you can always put them in that Q&A button at the control panel at the bottom of your screen, and we'll see those pop up. All right, so our first question is, as an employee who isn't necessarily a part of recruiting deliberations or policy discussions, what are some ways in which I can encourage my firm to participate in inclusive interviewing to build a diverse team?
Oh, thank you so much. I think that's a really, really wonderful question. And I think that because a person, or when a person is not specifically involved with those policy discussions, there's even more of a wonderful impetus. And that can happen through emailing HR and telling them to watch this video. It can happen through you reviewing your own evaluation and saying, it's not clear to me what rubric is being used here. Shouldn't our organization have rubrics so that our evaluation process is fairer? I actually think that in some ways, coming from you, it is actually an even more important to a certain extent request, because it shows that people who are not necessarily being paid to do this, people who are not necessarily in this capacity, value it. It could happen by you, again, reaching out to HR and saying, oh, I looked at the list of new associates at the firm. I realize that most of them are from schools that are AmLaw top 10 or what have you. Have we been reaching out to others? Just because you are not necessarily in that job role does not mean that your voice does not matter.
Wonderful. Thank you for that insight. Our next question is, how do I explain microaggressions to coworkers who don't seem to understand?
Oh my goodness, that can be very difficult. So I would literally give them the definition. And the definition is this. Let's just give a very, very easy or simple definition. It is a slight. It is a slight that is based on a stereotype. And very often, this slight, which is based on a stereotype, may come across as a positive or a compliment when in fact the stereotype underlying it is very negative and very harmful. And so I would give them examples. I would say, oh, if you meet someone who's of Asian ancestry and say, you speak English so well, despite the fact the person was born in the United States and of course speaks English well, this is a microaggression. It sounds like a compliment. You speak English so well, but the underlying stereotype or assumption is that the person would not. So I would say that these are slights. These are very often insults that appear to be compliments, but are still insults because they are based on stereotypes. And I would let them know that although people think that they are harmless, over time, they really erode people's feeling of belonging. No one wants to have to explain him, her, or their self over and over again at an organization.
Thank you for that explanation. Our next question is, I don't live in a very diverse community, but I still want my firm to reflect the ways I value diversity. Do you have any advice on recruiting more of a diverse staff?
I love this question. What a powerful question. And I think that it's a really great question. And I think that many organizations are grappling with this in many creative ways. One creative way that you are aware of, I'm sure, remote work. I have consulted with many organizations that have increased their pool of candidates through remote opportunities. In this way, they are often recruiting diverse candidates that don't live nearby. Let's say the person lives 45 minutes or an hour away. That might be a long commute if you have to do it every day. But if it's one time every other week, I have a brother-in-law who has a system where he only had to go in every other Wednesday or what have you, then it's not so bad. So we can be creative about finding these solutions through the technology that we have. So what does that consist of? Very often it consists of remote work. And I would say often there may be people even within our locale. We just have to connect with the right recruiters, the right schools, the right networks, the right bar associations, etc., in order to find them.
Awesome. And I think the last question that we have time for is, what do you feel is the best way to practice eliminating the bias you mentioned? Should I practice interviews with friends or colleagues?
That is a really, really good question. And I do think that practicing is an absolutely wonderful idea. But more so than that, I feel as if we have to systematize the elimination of bias. So if you were to create a certain list of interview questions, and of course, based on the conversation, you probably will not be strict to the list. But if we just had an interview protocol that said, take a mindful moment, breathe in and out before the interview. You can do this with the interviewee. I'm very confident the interviewee would welcome it. If someone before an interview with all those nerves said, can we just take a moment and take a deep breath and have a mindful moment? Oh, what a relief that would be, right? So we have the protocol in place in which we say, this is what we do when we are interviewing. We are taking a mindful moment. We are asking these questions. We're self-monitoring and saying, okay, are there some assumptions that are in my mind that are flowing that I'm not asking about and instead are going to cause me to create a potentially biased, negative or positive assumption about this person. And so I would say definitely practice. It's a beautiful idea, but certainly create a protocol. And I see one other question, but I might be able to tap. This is an anonymous attendee. What's the I, A, and T in LGBTQIA? So I is generally intersex. A is asexual, T is transgender. And so I hope that helps if you missed it during the program. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of your insight, Amma, and joining us today. And thank you all for all of your questions. We're almost out of time for today, so I'm going to go ahead and hand things back over to Marina to wrap things up.
Thanks, Nina, and thanks, Aman. Thanks to all of you for being here today. It's really great to have y'all here to learn about this. I won't keep you too long. I know we're over time, but I do want to touch on those housekeeping things we discussed at the beginning. I do want to remind you that Justia Connect Pro has additional benefits for lawyers beyond just these CLE courses, which are a very big benefit, but it also offers you the opportunity to take advantage of a $200 Justia credit that can be used on our eligible Justia marketing solutions, as well as featured reviews in the Justia Lawyer Directory and an enhanced Justia profile, and even more than that. So if you have more interest in Justia Connect Pro, I encourage you to check out your Justia Connect dashboard or that information at pro.justia.com to see how it can help you achieve your practice goals. Thank you all for being here today.
Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.